From industry news to mobile technology leaks and rumors, we cover tomorrow's tech news today. eSIM Tech News.
Yeah. Woo.
I just need my space right now.
Fresh off the G5 jet, I'm on my way to a brand new kick.
It would help if I unmuted my mic. Welcome to eSIMstudios live stream, YouTube channel, all the above. Today is Saturday, June the 14th, 2025. Let me make sure my audio is working. Sure is. Okay, perfect. So we have, I got a couple of news stories that we're going to go through today. I'm going to have a sneak peek at the upcoming Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. There was a case manufacturer. Looks familiar. I don't want to not necessarily blame it on them, but it looks like a very thin case company. We got some photos from a thin case company that shows the Z Fold 7 and all of its thinness, its thin frame. So we'll get a sneak peek at that. And then we're also going to take a look at the new upcoming Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite 2. As you can tell by the thumbnail, we have some benchmark numbers. Now I know that's benchmarks don't mean everything, but they're very impressive nonetheless. We will take a look at that. And then moving into the future, we have some troubling news for, not for case companies, for phone manufacturers in the rising costs that they will undoubtedly see when it comes to the heart and soul of each and every device. So I'll let some people file in here. Looks like we got a couple people in. Usually takes a couple minutes for everybody to get the notification. So trying out this new wireless mic. Audio sounds decent. It's not as good as my professional mic, but it does allow me to not have to sit close to the microphone, right? I'm using a wireless mic, so I've seen reviewed some of my past live streams, and the audio sounds good enough, right? I wish it was a little more clear, but I think it comes through fine for most people. It allows me to have some free area up here. There's no microphone stuck in my face. So as you can tell by my shirt, the Qualcomm Snapdragon, that'll be the main topic we're going to discuss today. But since we got some people in here filing in, it looks like we'll go ahead and get started. So the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7, we expected this device. Well, I take it back. We did not really know what to expect. Now, recent leaks in the past month or two, looks like it's going to be pretty amazing as far as how thin it is. Look, Samsung is up against it. I think, and I've said before, I think Samsung, since they were really the innovators of the foldable device, they sort of had a sizable lead as far as their R&D goes, meaning research and development. It took a few years for other competitors to catch up, and now Oppo is really killing it right now. Motorola's, of course, been in the foldable game for forever. In fact, they probably initiated the foldable game, but Samsung has really been on top of that mountain. But I think being on top of the game, basically, I think they sat back with their arms crossed, kind of, sitting there a little too reluctant to put any major advancements and or newer technology in their foldables, and that allowed for companies like Oppo to catch up. And now that they've caught up, Samsung's like, oh shit, like we got to do something, because Samsung has seen their foldable sales drop off. Past 2 years, they've seen a steady decline in sales. Now, I have never purchased a Fold series. I have purchased every Flip series that they've made, and that's not the most dependable device. Half of them have been destroyed basically by a single drop. So they're not the most dependable phones. If you do get a foldable, I do recommend you getting insurance on it. Like with some phones I get insurance, with some phones I don't, right? Like obviously with the OnePluses I don't, with Nothings they don't have insurance. I know you can go out and buy third-party insurance, but typically with Samsung foldables, it's a must. I don't even question it, right? Because with it being a foldable, and with my experience, even a 2-3 foot drop has destroyed the screen on a Flip series device. But it looks like Samsung is not necessarily pulling out all the stops on this Fold 7 and Flip 7, but they are making some major improvements. One of them being the thinness and just how thin it is when it's unfolded. Now with the Flip 7, it's not going to be amazingly thin, although I would like to see that come to fruition. But with such a little area to put a battery, that battery would be super small if they brought that same thinness that was on the Fold 7 to the Flip 7. But with the Fold 7, you're going to see an absolute amazing thin device when it's unfolded, because it looks like we're gearing up to basically have my dream foldable. So the reason why I haven't purchased a foldable in the past is because they're too clunky. They're too weird holding. So I think I would use it, majority of the time I would use it closed like a regular phone, right? I think there would be times where, and that's what you have to ask yourself when you buy a foldable. Obviously with a Flip, you're going to use it majority time opened up. But with a foldable, how often are you going to use it with it folded out? Obviously to consume media. If you're in my shoes, you would open it up to edit videos, right? Doing video editing and stuff on there, on device editing. So I would use it for media consumption and editing, but I believe, but that's not the majority of my time. Majority of my time, I think I would use a Fold series device with it closed, like a normal phone. Now, the dimensions, the style, the way it looks have just been too clunky for me in the past, because it essentially feels like you're holding two phones in your hand at once. It basically, if you do have two phones, basically feels like you're holding two phones together, right? Now, that's not the majority of the reason why I didn't purchase it, but it's the aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio meaning the length times the length and the width of the device, right? I've always said I would be interested in buying a foldable if it was essentially like having a S25 Ultra just open up to two S25 Ultra. So essentially, if it was the same aspect ratio, meaning height and width, but the previous foldables were always super tall and super skinny, and it just didn't feel right in the hand. I think this year is the very first year that they look to correct that, because we have new leaks, and we'll get to those images right now. It basically looks like an S25 Edge that opens up into two S25 Edges. It's going to have a decent height and width, and it'll just open up to two. And I think that's where, for me personally, I would feel more comfortable using a phone like that, because you get that same surface area, screen real estate, that it feels like you're using a regular phone. So let me pull up a couple of images we got here. Now, let me pull up this first one, and I'll show you that aspect ratio that I'm talking about. So let me share this tab, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So check this out. So here is the Fold 7. I know it's a weird angle. I know it kind of, it looks like it's at an awkward angle, right? But you can tell the tall, thin frame that consisted the folds in previous years appears to be gone. It looks like it's basically a thin S24 Ultra, because it's more squared off than rounded than the S25 Ultra. So it basically looks like an S24 Ultra, same aspect ratio, that just opens up into two phones, into a tablet, right? And when it's folded closed, it's going to be about the same thickness when it's folded closed of an S24 Ultra. Let me see what other photos we got here. That's it. So check this out. I'm going to show you another angle. Look at this. So this is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 folded closed. It's so thin that when it's folded closed, it's essentially the same height or thickness as an S24 Ultra or S25 Ultra. Here's a different view right here. Well, it gives you a different angle. You get the same side angle, but here you can tell that left image right here, it basically looks like an S24 Ultra. So I'm talking about the aspect ratio as far as height. Actually, that is a thin-borne case, a fiber-borne case. I'll be darned. So they are the culprit. Well, maybe not them necessarily, but somewhere between, somehow that photo got leaked out. Does it say fiber-borne on there? It says thin-borne, doesn't it? Wow. Well. I did not look that close, but I was like, holy crap, it says thin-borne on there? I was just in contact with them. So it does look like a phenomenal case. As you can tell, I'm currently editing, in the process of editing videos for, I got thin-borne here, a case here. I got thin-borne case on my Pixel 9 Pro XL. So I use these cases religiously. So very interesting to see. Now, this is apparently going to be released sometime in July. Not sure specifically when. No launch date has been made official, but it has gone through FCC certification, so you know time is coming near for this Fold 7 and Flip 7, may I add, to get launched. So we'll have full coverage of it. We're also supposed to be getting new earbuds, I believe, possibly new Galaxy Buds FE models, which these aren't the Buds FE, where are they? I have multiple FE buds. They're my favorite earbuds for the price. They last forever. Audio quality is good. They got a white and a black. So hopefully if they do release new earbuds, we will get those as well. So I'm not sure if I'll be getting the Fold 7 or Flip 7 because the Nothing Phone 3 is coming out. Now, I haven't heard anything from Nothing. Probably going to have to be buying that on my own. We don't get that many devices given to us for review, so I'm having to purchase these out of my own pocket. So not sure, although I could possibly get a Flip series with a trade-in, right? I got my trade-in hack. You just go find a cheap trade-in. We'll see though. We'll definitely cover the release of this and the launch of these foldables here coming soon. But let's roll into the main topic of the show now. What is that? That is the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 specs, and well, I guess benchmark results have been leaked, and boy, is it a performance enhancer on top of the already strong 8 Elite, OG 8 Elite. So Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 benchmarks have been spotted. Now, it shows significant improvements in terms of performance, and they basically boost clock speeds of the GPU, the Adreno 840 GPU that's going to be inside the chipset of the 8 Elite Gen 2. Now, check this out. Benchmark scores, these are incredible. Benchmark scores of the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 shows a single core score of 4,000 points. 4,000 points. Now, that's compared to the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 1 that's in most all of, I shouldn't say most all, but at least in these Samsung devices, because Pixel has its own CPU. It's in the Samsung devices, OnePlus devices, and possibly the Nothing Phone 3. The current flagship 8 Elite scores 3,200 points in the single core. So reaching a 4,000 point plateau for the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 is incredible. Now check out this. The multi-core score hit 13,000 points. Now this is Geekbench 6. 13,000 points for the Gen 2. While the current flagship sits at just over 10,000. Now there's only been one device, and I can't remember what it was, and only one benchmark test where I've gotten over 10,000 points. Usually the majority of my benchmarking tests with Geekbench in the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset gets just under 10,000, right? Like 9,700, 9,800, somewhere right around there. But the best one to date is 10,300 points. I would say it floats right around that 10,000 point mark. The 8 Elite Gen 2 is at 13,000 points, which is insane. The Adreno 840 GPU is going to be clocked at 1.35 gigahertz compared to the current Adreno 830 that's in the 8 Elite is at 1.1 gigahertz. Now, moving over to Antutu, they achieved a score of 3.8 million points on Antutu with this Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2. 3.8 million points, which is pretty impressive considering the fastest current Android phone with the 8 Elite, the iQOO 13, scored just under 2.7 million points. So you're seeing about a 40% increase in performance when it comes to the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2. 40% increase in performance over the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 1. It's a pretty big performance jump. Now, that's all fine and dandy. All the scores, all that stuff is great. But when it comes to real world usability, I've found that the majority of my phones, well, I take that back. The S25 Ultra that runs the 8 Elite, mine are overheating, right? They are getting hot. Now, the OnePlus 13, which runs that Snapdragon 8 Elite, does not get hot. Now, that OnePlus 13 has an enormous vapor chamber, much bigger than Samsung's. Now, the other device that I've found to work perfectly fine is the S25 Edge. That has the Snapdragon 8 Elite, however, has a modified version. The S25 Edge has a 7-core Snapdragon 8 Elite. One less core to generate heat. My S25 Edge stays cool to the touch throughout any types of usage. My S25 Ultra gets hot, runs hot. All these numbers are great and fine. I just worry about this Gen 2 with it generating so much performance. Are my devices going to be getting hot? Like, I'm hoping, we just saw some sneak pictures, some leaked pictures of the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. It's going to be running the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset. I'm thinking they're going to put the 7-core 8 Elite chipset in that Fold 7 just because of how thin it is. There's no room for that heat to go anywhere. The Edge is an incredibly thin phone. And I think Samsung, we won't know until we actually get the device and can double check the internals. I think Samsung's going to put that 7-core 8 Elite in the Fold 7, which is completely fine. I don't notice any performance decrease. Still appears to be on par. It just has one less core to generate less heat. Moving into the 8 Elite Gen 2, That's my only worry. This thing is such a high performer. It's going to be generating a lot of heat, right? So keep an eye on that. These things do generate heat, and it looks like some companies have requested a modified version of it by removing a core to try to reduce that heat, because this phone stays cool while the S25 Ultra stays hot. And I've seen a lot of comments in some of my videos where some S25 Ultra users, there's actually a lot of them now, are claiming that their phones are running hot. So I'm in favor of the 7-core 8 Elite, and I think moving forward, you're going to see Qualcomm manufacture a 7-core 8 Elite Gen 2 for these thin devices, for these companies to choose for these thin devices, so it doesn't run as hot, right? Now, in terms of cost, we've seen some reports that in the past that these CPUs every year are getting more expensive to make. Every year you see price increases. Now, that inflation not just going into CPU manufacturing, right? You're seeing inflation across the board. Gas, especially now with the war going on in the Middle East. You're seeing grocery bills getting high. You're seeing everything going up. Toys for kids, sprays, cleaners, all prices across the board are going up. And so are they in the manufacturing world when it comes to semiconductors, right? So there's a new report. Check this out. Let me show you this. There's a new report, and this could very well... Actually, before we do that, before we get to the rising costs and what that means for you and for these phone companies, I came across this Dimensity 9500 Geekbench score. Let's compare these scores real quick to MediaTek's upcoming best CPU versus the 8 Elite Gen 2. So check this out. Let me show you this real quick, then we'll move on. What the price increase of these CPUs. Check this out. MediaTek Dimensity 9500. So MediaTek, I'm a huge fan of MediaTek CPUs. I've used a couple of them. I have not used an extensive amount of them, but the couple that I have used, I've been blown away. Been really, really good. So I want to see MediaTek, I want to use more devices with MediaTek CPUs in them. And I think our story after this, with this will directly tie in to our next story and our last story with the rising costs of these CPUs. So the current MediaTek Dimensity 9400 is their flagship CPU, and guess what? It's kind of funny how, like, when some companies leak information, oh, their competitor leaks their information, right? So this new Dimensity 9500 Geekbench score leaked out, right? So Digital Chat Station, who in Asian markets is the most creditable leaker, and he leaks a bunch of tech stuff. Well, they leaked a score from this Geekbench score from the Dimensity 9500, and it also shows a enormous performance increase over the previous generation, as much as 49%. Now, we just talked about a 40% increase in the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 over the Gen 1. Well, this Dimensity 9500 shows an almost 49% increase over the 9400 MediaTek CPU. Now, check these scores out. So the Dimensity 9500 scores 3,900 points in Geekbench single core. Remember, the 8 Elite Gen 2 scored 4,000. This is 3,900, so it's right up there in single core. And in multi-core scored just over 11,000 points in the multi-core score. So not as high as the 13,000 with the 8 Elite Gen 2 from Qualcomm, but it's up there. Like that's getting up there. This would be no slouch. In fact, it technically could. Now, these benchmark scores don't tell you how well these CPUs are going to perform in a said device, because that's only half the battle, right? The CPUs and GPUs can generate so much power, but it's up to the developers from each phone company to fine-tune that power. It's like a race car, right? You can have a engine which is comparable to the CPU, that generates so much power out of its pistons, right? But it's up to the team, to the race car team, to the F1 team, to not only take that power, but apply it to the ground, apply it to your car. So you have to fine tune the suspension. You have to fine tune the timing of that motor. You have to fine tune everything. So having that power is only half the battle. Real world usability, that comes into play with the developers, right? The app developers, these phone developers, developers at Samsung, developers at Nothing, developers at Oppo, developers at OnePlus, developers at Xiaomi with their own X-Ring CPU, right? They have to fine tune that power to give you nice, smooth feedback, gameplay, usability in the operating system. So just the fact that they are neck and neck with these scores means that you should have a very powerful, very capable CPU for MediaTek. And I really want to see and use this device, this chipset. I just don't know what devices will be carrying it, but I will keep you in tune with what devices these CPUs are going to be launched in, right? So it looks like the Dimensity 9500 is going to be manufactured by TSMC, and of course the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 is going to be manufactured by TSMC. The 8 Elite Gen 2 is going to be on a all brand new 2 nanometer node. So currently the 8 Elite, which is in Samsung flagships, and most other flagship CPUs are on a 3 nanometer node. The 8 Elite Gen 2 is going to be on a 2 nanometer node, latest cutting edge technology. I'm not sure. Let's see. Is this MediaTek Dimensity 9500? Let's see. Is this on a 2 nanometer node? It says these numbers are phenomenally high and borderline unattainable with just a minor node upgrade. TSMC, okay, so the MediaTek Dimensity 9500 is going to be on a 3 nanometer node, 3rd generation. So this will not be on the 2 nanometer, but Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 will be on a 2 nanometer. So you have the Dimensity 9500 on a 3 nanometer and the 8 Elite Gen 2 on the 2 nanometer. Now, moving into price. There is a concern, before we get out of here, there's a big concern, and this will affect you in the future. The rising costs of these CPUs, right? So there's a report that says not this upcoming Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 2 that we were just talking about this whole stream, not this one, but the 3rd generation, so a year from now, looking into the future, so not the upcoming S26 series, but the S27 series from Samsung will have the Snapdragon 8 Elite Gen 3 in there. Looks like it might be too expensive for some phones. So there's a new leak, a new report that claims Qualcomm could release not 1 but 2 flagship Snapdragon chipsets next year, mirroring the Apple how they do theirs, their A18 and A18 Pro. Because the more powerful SoC could almost be, the Pro Series variant could almost be too expensive for these companies to be putting in their devices, because it says moving into the future, as I mentioned, the S27 or the Xiaomi 17 series, these CPUs could be up to 30 and 40% more expensive from where we're at right now, which definitely, if you're a smartphone manufacturer, it has me thinking, for Qualcomm, at what point are the prices going to get too high for companies like Samsung or Xiaomi to say, hey, this is too high, because they can't afford a small price increase, because, and each company is different, right? Each company has a set number of price increases for parts that go into a phone. At what point is spending X amount of dollars per device too much to where it cuts into their profits, because they may raise the price per phone $50, which we've seen recently, $100, which we've seen recently, like with the S25 Ultra, right? It was, I think originally, the S22, S23 Ultra was $11.99. Now it's $12.99, right? So they've raised the prices $100. That goes into Samsung paying for parts that are frankly more expensive to put in the phone, to make the phone, to manufacture the device, right? But at what point can they raise the price and then you see sales start to drop off? Because would you buy an S27 Ultra that starts at $15.99, $16.99? That's a little too high, don't you? Or at least for me it is. Everybody's different, right? I'm not buying a $1,800, $1,700, even a $1,600 base model. I'm talking about base models here. S27 Ultra. They know that only Samsung has the figures. They do a bunch of research. They know the data. Xiaomi only knows that. OnePlus, right? You see nothing raise the price of their flagship phone 3 to $800, up from $700, or what was it? What did I get my phone 2 for? I think it was $650, $649. Now the base model is going to be $799. So you see it increase $150, $200. That's because they're using a more expensive CPU, more expensive parts. Are you going to buy, let's see, what year would that be? So not the phone 4, the Nothing Phone 5. What if its base price is $12.99? Would you buy a $1,300 Nothing Phone 5? Like, see what I'm saying? Like, at some point, at some price increase, the sales just drop off. So only they know, and it has me thinking, at some point, these companies are going to have to pass. And you see why these companies are investing money in their own CPUs. It's much, much cheaper to design, build, manufacture your own CPU than reach out to Qualcomm and make a deal with them, right? That's why you see Google making their own CPUs, not just for money reasons, because you can do what you want with the CPU, but you see Xiaomi, they just launched their own CPU, and moving into the future, they will be using their own CPU. Samsung, although they've had issues, believe me, Samsung would love to have each and every S25 Ultra, S26 Ultra with a Samsung Exynos CPU. It probably kills Samsung each and every year that a new flagship device gets released and it has a Qualcomm Snapdragon, even though I'm sure the relationship is fine, and I'm sure they would say and admit that they have a wonderful relationship with Qualcomm, and I'm sure they do. But deep down inside, they would rather have their own CPU powering their own device, just like Apple does with their own devices, what Xiaomi is doing with their own devices, right? With Google doing with their own devices. So it makes me look into the future and think, damn, I wonder when enough or too much is too much, meaning the prices of these. It has me thinking maybe 5 years from now, I wonder if Qualcomm's even going to be in the smartphone industry anymore. Now, it may be they may manufacture some cheaper, lower end CPUs for mid-range phones or budget phones, but when it comes to the flagship segment, these are going to get too expensive for these phone manufacturers to continually purchase every year and put in their devices. At some point, you're going to have to make a change. And I think Qualcomm, well, I know Qualcomm has thought about this. And I know Qualcomm has everybody tries to predict the future. You never know what's going to happen, but they do studies on this, right? At what point is our CPU too expensive to try to sell to a Samsung, to try to sell to nothing, before they look for alternative methods and materials and suppliers? So keep an eye on that. I would not doubt there is a big change in the next 5 years when it comes to CPUs. I think in the future. Now, when it comes to nothing, a company that will have to, they don't have enough money to manufacture their own CPUs, but maybe they turn to MediaTek, right? MediaTek, you can get a comparable. MediaTek's flagship CPU is roughly 30% cheaper than the flagship Qualcomm Snapdragon CPU. So at what point does nothing turn to MediaTek to supply them with all of their CPUs, right? So I think it's a major concern for Qualcomm, not just for Qualcomm, but for MediaTek, for all CPUs. But it shall be interesting, and I think we're going to see major changes in the next 5 years. I think you're going to see a big shift in CPU manufacturing and usage when it comes to our smartphones. So I'm going to get out of here and appreciate the time as always. And if you got any questions, hit me up in the comments. See y'all tomorrow. Peace.